The sparks raining down from the overhead conduit were hot enough to sting through the fabric of Jax's coveralls. But he barely flinched. He was too busy wrestling with a rusted locking bolt on the primary ventilation shaft of Sector 4 to care about minor burns. Kestrel Ring was a dying station, a circular carcass of steel and ceramic spinning slowly in the dark, held together by duct tape, prayer, and the sweat of men like him who had nowhere else to go. Around him, the air smelled of ozone and recycled coffee. A holographic newsfeed flickered on a nearby wall, the image distorted by static. The anchor's voice, smooth and synthetic, cut through the grinding noise of the station's failing gravity scrubbers. We continue to see record prosperity in the Outer Rim thanks to the generosity of the Vithari Empire, the voice crooned. Human colonies report a 30% increase in nutrient gel shipments. The light of the Vithari shines upon us all. Jax tightened his grip on the wrench and gave the bolt a violent jerk. Metal shrieked, then gave way. Generosity. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. He wiped a smear of grease from his forehead, leaving a black streak across his pale, scarred skin. The newsfeed showed a sweeping shot of a Vithari dreadnought, a thing of terrible beauty, its hull curving like a polished gemstone, purple and gold lights pulsing along its flanks. For a second, the station workshop vanished. Jax was back in the mud of Proxima Centauri 6. The sky was burning, and the sound was not the hum of a ventilation fan, but the scream of orbital bombardment. He saw the line of human soldiers, boys really, clutching kinetic rifles that were useless against the energy shields of the advancing Vithari constructs. He heard the order come down from the command link. Hold the line. Reinforcements are incoming. They never came. The Vithari commanders watched from their high orbit, treating the battlefield like a chessboard where pawns were meant to be sacrificed to test an enemy's flank. Jax remembered the heat of the plasma scorching the air, the smell of charred earth, the way the sergeant looked when the sniper drone took his head off. Jax blinked, forcing the memory back into the locked box in his mind where he kept the war. He was not Sergeant Jax anymore. He was just a mechanic who fixed things that were too broken to be worth saving. He dropped the wrench into his toolkit with a heavy clank. A chime sounded from his wristcom. It was blinking red. "Jax!" a voice rasped. It was Krell, the station's operations manager, a man who would sell his own lungs if the price was right on the black market. "Get up to the VIP docking ring, now." Jax tapped the comm. "I am not security detail today. Krell, I am fixing the air scrubbers so we do not all suffocate by Tuesday." "Forget the scrubbers," Krell snapped. "I have a client, high profile, needs a local escort who knows the layout and does not look like he will trip over his own feet. I told them you were the best. Do not make a liar out of me." "I am busy. It pays 5,000 credits, up front." Jax paused. 5,000. That was enough to buy a refurbished hyperdrive core for the scrap heap ship he had been rebuilding in Hangar 9. It was enough to get off Kestrel Ring. Enough to get away from the news feeds and the Vithari patrols and the memories. "I am on my way," Jax said. The upper docking ring was a different world. Here, the air was filtered until it smelled of nothing at all, and the floor plates were polished to a mirror shine. But even the best human engineering looked like a child's toy compared to what was currently docking at Berth 1. It was a Vithari star yacht. It did not look built. It looked grown. The hull was a seamless pearlescent material that seemed to breathe, shifting subtly from white to soft lavender. There were no visible thrusters, only a shimmering distortion in the air around it where the ship manipulated gravity itself to hold its position. Jax stood near the airlock, arms crossed over his chest, wearing his cleanest tactical vest, which still had a stain on the collar, and a belt loaded with a stun baton and a kinetic pistol. Around him, the station's human officials were in a panic. Krell was sweating through his dress uniform, barking orders at a terrified cleaning crew. "Straighten that line," Krell hissed. "If the ambassador smells mildew, I will have you ejected out of the airlock." Jax leaned against a support strut, watching the display with cynical amusement. It was pathetic. Humans scrambling to bow and scrape before the species that treated them like indentured servants. The yacht's airlock didn't open, it dissolved. The material simply thinned and parted like a heavy mist, revealing a ramp of solidified light that extended down to the deck. The atmosphere in the docking bay changed instantly. The gravity grew lighter, sweeter. A low hum vibrated in Jax's teeth. The Vithari delegation descended. First came the guards, tall and slender in armor that looked like white ceramic glass, their faces hidden behind smooth, faceless helms. Then came the aides, carrying data crystals and floating hollows. And then, the centerpiece. She was taller than Jax, though much of that was the grace with which she held herself. Her skin was a pale violet, translucent enough to show the faint, rhythmic pulsing of bioluminescent veins beneath the surface. Patterns of light, like living tattoos, swirled across her collarbone and up her long, elegant neck. She wore a gown of living fabric that rippled and changed color with her movement, shifting from deep royal blue to the color of a bruising storm. Princess Lyriel. Jax recognized her from the propaganda feeds, the niece of the High Council, the face of the Empire's youth. She stepped onto the dirty metal of Kestrel Ring and stopped immediately. Her nose, delicate and sharp, wrinkled. "It smells of rust," Lyriel said. Her voice was melodic but carried an edge of profound irritation. "And dead air. Why is the gravity so heavy it feels like I am wearing lead boots?" An aide hurried to her side, a small Vithari male with nervous hands. "It is standard Earth norm gravity, Your Highness. We can adjust your personal field generator." "Do so," she commanded, not looking at him. Her eyes, solid pools of luminescent gold without pupils, swept across the room. They passed over Krell, who was bowing so low he was nearly horizontal, and landed on Jax. She stared at him. Jax stared back. He did not bow. He did not salute. He just stood there, looking bored. Lyriel tilted her head. "What is that?" she asked the aide, pointing a long, slender finger at Jax. "That is your local security escort, Highness," the aide whispered. "His name is Jax. He is a highly recommended contractor." Lyriel walked toward him. She moved with a fluid, predator-like grace, the gravity around her seeming to bend to her will. She stopped 2 feet from him, looming slightly. Up close, the light in her skin was mesmerizing, a slow, hypnotic strobe. "You are standing very casually," she observed. "I am standing," Jax said. "It saves energy." Her eyes narrowed. She looked him up and down, taking in the scuffed boots, the utility belt, the grease under his fingernails. She let out a short musical sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. "Local fauna with muscles," she said to her aide, though she kept her eyes on Jax. "Is this the best the humans could dredge up?" "He looks like he was assembled from spare parts." "I was," Jax said flatly. "The warranty expired years ago." The aide gasped. Krell looked like he was about to have a stroke. Lyriel's expression shifted. The boredom cracked, replaced by a flicker of surprise. She was not used to the furniture talking back. "It speaks," she said, a small smile touching her lips. It was not a nice smile. "And it has a primitive wit. Very well. You may walk behind me. Try not to breathe too loudly. Your air filters sound like they are struggling." "After you, Your Highness," Jax said, gesturing with one hand. try not to trip on the cables when we locals leave them everywhere." She glared at him, the bioluminescence on her neck flaring a brighter purple, betraying her annoyance. She spun around, her living dress whipping the air, and marched toward the exit. "Come, Soreth," she commanded. From behind her, a sphere of floating crystal the size of a melon drifted forward. It hummed softly, projecting a soft blue light. This was her AI, a thinking machine far more advanced than anything humans were allowed to possess. Jax fell in step behind them, his hand resting near his pistol. He caught Krell's eye as he passed. The manager mouthed the words 5,000 credits with desperate intensity. Jax gritted his teeth. He would endure the insults. He would walk the princess through the slums, and he would take the money and leave this sector forever. The tour was a disaster from the start. Lyriel had insisted on seeing the real station, which meant dragging her entourage down to the habitation decks where the workers lived. It was a warren of cramped corridors, flickering lights, and the constant thrumming vibration of the station's engines. People stopped to stare as they passed, tired men and women in gray jumpsuits, children with smudges of oil on their faces. They watched the glowing alien princess with a mixture of awe and resentment. Lyriel seemed oblivious to their mood. She treated the sector like a zoo. "Look at how they stack their living quarters," she said, gesturing at the rows of bunk pods. "Like insects in a hive. Soreth, record this. The architecture of desperation." "Recording?" The crystal orb chimed in a neutral, genderless voice. "Tell me, human," Lyriel said, not turning her head to look at Jax. "Is it true your species only lives for 80 or 90 cycles? It seems hardly worth the effort of being born." "Some of us make it to 100 if we do not get shot at," Jax said, scanning the crowd. He did not like the sight lines here. Too many shadows. 100, she scoffed. "I have boots older than that. And your reproductive cycle, I read it, is terribly inefficient, chaotic. You just mix genetic material at random and hope for the best? It explains the lack of symmetry in your faces." Jax stepped over a puddle of leaking coolant. "We like the surprise and keeps life interesting." "It sounds messy," she said, wrinkling her nose as they passed a food stall selling fried protein sticks. "And emotional. We Vithari are decanted in the ancestral wells, chosen, perfected. We do not leave our future to chance." "That explains why you all look the same," Jax muttered. Lyriel stopped. She turned slowly. The lights in her skin were flashing rapid, angry crimson patterns now. "You are insolent," she said softly. The bustling corridor went silent. The humans nearby backed away, terrified of provoking the alien. "I am honest," Jax said. "You hired me for protection, not for flattery. If you want someone to tell you how perfect you are, talk to the floating ball. Soreth is a higher intelligence," she snapped. "You are a biological accident." "And yet," Jax said, taking a step closer, invading her personal space just enough to make her flinch. "I am the one with the gun who is watching the shadows while you look at your reflection. Keep moving. Princess, we are drawing a crowd." She held his gaze for a long moment. The air between them crackled. It was hate, certainly. But there was something else under it. A friction, a challenge. She wasn't used to resistance, and he wasn't used to restraining himself. She huffed, spinning back around. "Walk faster, Fauna. I am bored of this level." Jax resumed his scan, but the hairs on the back of his neck were prickling. Something was wrong. It wasn't just the princess's attitude. He had noticed a maintenance crew 3 junctions back. They were working on a panel that didn't need fixing, and their uniforms were too clean. Their hands were shaking. Then there were the drones. The station's security drones usually patrolled the perimeter, but Jax had counted 4 of them rerouted to this specific sector in the last 10 minutes. They were hovering in the rafters, silent, watching. He looked at the Vithari aide, the nervous one. The alien kept glancing at a holographic display projected from his wrist implant. It was a chrono. He was counting down. "Wait," Jax said, stopping. Lyriel sighed loudly. "What now? Has your primitive brain found a shiny object?" "Soreth," Jax said, ignoring her. "Scan the local grid. Any traffic spikes?" The crystal orb bobbed. "Accessing. Distinct interference detected. Local protocols are being rewritten." Suddenly, the orb convulsed. The blue light inside it turned a sickly, jagged green. It let out a high-pitched, static screech. "Soreth!" Lyriel reached for the device. "What is wrong with it?" For a second, the hologram projected from the orb shifted. It wasn't the station map anymore. It was a sigil, a fractured sun with a dagger through it. Jax knew that symbol. He had seen it in intelligence briefings during the war. It belonged to the Ascendant Blade, a radical faction of Vithari hardliners who believed humanity should be exterminated, not ruled. The symbol vanished as quickly as it appeared, but the damage was done. "Sabotage!" Jax roared. He lunged forward. "Get down!" He didn't wait for her permission. He grabbed Lyriel by her waist, his arm hooking around her midsection like an iron bar. She shrieked, "Unhand me!" Boom! The world turned white. A massive explosion ripped through the bulkhead 10 meters ahead of them. The shockwave hit Jax like a physical hammer, lifting him off his feet. The floor buckled. The sound was deafening, a roar that vibrated in the marrow of his bones. Sirens began to wail, a rising and falling scream. "Gravity failure imminent," the station computer announced calmly. "Sector lockdown engaged." The artificial gravity generators in the floor sputtered and died. Instantly, up became a suggestion. Debris, crates, metal shards, the fried protein sticks, began to float. Jax kicked off a wall, his mag boots engaging with a magnetic thud that anchored him to the tilting deck. Lyriel was flailing, weightless, her dress billowing around her like a cloud of glowing smoke. She was spinning out of control, heading straight toward a jagged piece of torn hull plating. "Grab my hand!" Jax shouted over the roar of escaping air. She looked at him, eyes wide with genuine terror. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the primal fear of a creature out of its element. She reached out. Jax caught her wrist. He yanked her toward him, slamming her body against his chest. He locked his arm around her again. "Do not let go," he growled. Another explosion rocked the corridor. The panoramic viewing window to their right, a sheet of transparent aluminum, shattered. The vacuum of space roared, hungry and cold. Air rushed out in a violent torrent, dragging everything loose with it. Bodies tumbled past them, screaming silently in the thin air. Jax gritted his teeth, his boots straining against the magnetic plating. He felt Lyriel burying her face in his neck, her hands clutching his tactical vest so hard he could feel her nails through the Kevlar. "We have to move," Jax yelled. "The structural integrity is failing." He fought his way down the corridor, step by heavy magnetic step, dragging the floating princess with him. Debris smashed against his shoulder, but he kept moving. "The lift!" Lyriel screamed, pointing. "The evacuation lift!" Ahead, the doors to a large freight elevator were forcing themselves open. It was designed to detach and act as a lifeboat. Jax moved toward it, but his combat instincts were screaming. He looked at the support beams above the lift shaft. They were sheared. The metal was glowing red-hot. The lift wasn't a lifeboat. It was a coffin. "No!" Jax stopped. "We must get in!" Lyriel cried, trying to pull him toward it. It is the only way. It is loose, Jax shouted. Look at the clamps. With a groan of tortured metal, the primary clamps on the lift snapped. The car began to slide, not up, but down, falling away from the station into the void. If they had stepped inside, they would be dead. But the corridor they were standing in was collapsing too. The floor beneath Jax's boots groaned. He saw a maintenance hatch on the left wall. It was small, designed for drones, but it led to the inner structural spine of the station. "Hold your breath," Jax ordered. "What?" He didn't explain. He deactivated his mag boots. Jax kicked off the wall with every ounce of strength he possessed. He launched them both across the zero-G space, twisting his body in midair to shield Lyriel. They flew through the narrow hatch just as the corridor behind them disintegrated. They tumbled into the maintenance shaft. Here. The emergency gravity was still active, but it was erratic, pulsing at double strength. They hit the floor hard. Jax took the brunt of the impact, landing on his back, but the momentum was too great. He rolled, trying to absorb the force, but Lyriel was thrown from his grip. She slammed into the metal grating. Her right leg caught in a gap in the floor plates. The rest of her body kept moving. Crack. The sound was sickeningly loud, like a dry branch snapping in a winter forest. Lyriel let out a scream that was not musical at all. It was raw, high, and ragged. She crumpled to the floor, her luminous skin flickering wildly, strobing from white to dark gray in chaotic bursts. "My leg!" she shrieked. "My leg!" Jax scrambled to his knees, ignoring the bruising on his own ribs. He crawled over to her. The angle was wrong. Her right leg was twisted outward in a way that anatomy, human or Vithari, did not support. Lyriel pushed herself up on her elbows. Her face was contorted with agony, tears of silver liquid streaming from her golden eyes. She looked down at her hip, then up at Jax. The shock was setting in. Her pupils, which Jax now saw appearing as tiny slits, were dilating wildly. She looked furious, humiliated, and utterly bewildered. I cannot sit," she stammered, her voice trembling with rage. She pointed a shaking finger at him. "I can't sit. You broke my hip. Human." It was an absurd accusation. The station was falling apart. Assassins were hunting them, and she was worried about sitting. But Jax saw the fear behind the entitlement. She was a creature of perfection, never scarred, never broken. This was not just pain. It was an insult to her existence. "I saved your life," Jax snapped, wiping blood from a cut above his eye. "If I had not tackled you, you would be floating in orbit right now." "You threw me," she sobbed, clutching her side. Medical alarms from her internal implants began to wail, a discordant electronic harmony radiating from her body. "You threw me through a hole." "I extracted the asset," Jax corrected. He reached for her. "Do not touch me. You have done enough damage." "We are not safe here, Princess," Jax said, his voice hard. "That explosion was not random, and it was not an engine failure." He grabbed her, ignoring her shriek of protest. He slid one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her into his arms. She was lighter than she looked, her bones hollow like a bird's. She beat her fists against his chest. "Put me down! I command you!" "You can command me when we are not being spaced." Jax grunted. He began to run, carrying her down the dim, flickering service tunnel. Above them, the station's PA system crackled to life. "Alert," the computer voice said. "Accidental breach in Sector 4. Containment teams dispatched. Please remain calm." "Accident," Jax muttered. He glanced down at the sobbing, glowing princess in his arms. He thought about the nervous aide, the drones, and the sigil on the AI. "That was no accident," he whispered to the darkness. "That was a hit." Lyriel whimpered, her head falling against his shoulder as the pain overwhelmed her adrenaline. Her skin faded to a dull, bruised blue. Jax tightened his grip on her. He didn't know who wanted her dead, but for 5,000 credits, and maybe just to spite the universe, he wasn't going to let them finish the job. The cargo bay smelled of burnt wiring, antiseptic, and the copper tang of blood. It had been hastily converted into a triage center, a chaotic purgatory where the wounded from the station collapse were being dragged, treated, or covered with tarps. Jax kicked the door release with a muddy boot, shouldering his way inside while clutching Princess Lyriel against his chest. She was shivering violently, her bioluminescence flashing in erratic, strobe-like bursts of distressed gray and pale chartreuse. Her head lolled against his tactical vest, her teeth grit so hard he could hear them grinding. "Medic!" Jax roared, his voice cutting through the din of shouting stevedores and weeping civilians. "I have a VIP, critical trauma." A grizzled man in a blood-smeared apron looked up from a makeshift table where he was soldering a prosthetic limb back onto a screaming dock worker. It was Doc Holloway, a man who had lost his license in the core worlds 20 years ago for reasons he never discussed. Holloway narrowed his eyes, wiping his hands on a rag. "Get in line, Jax. Unless that is the station administrator, they wait like everyone else." "It is the Vithari ambassador," Jax snapped, marching forward and kicking a crate of rations out of the way. He laid Lyriel down on a rusted shipping pallet covered with a thermal blanket. "She has a fractured hip, dislocated, maybe shattered." Holloway froze. The room seemed to quiet down as the humans nearby realized what, or who, was lying on the pallet. The glowing alien royalty looked absurdly out of place amidst the grime and grease of Kestrel Ring. Lyriel let out a high, keening sound as her back touched the hard surface. Her hands flew to her hip, hovering just above the skin. "Do not touch me," she hissed, her eyes squeezed shut. "Where are my physicians? Where is the Royal Medical Corps?" "Communications are down," Jax said, grabbing her wrist to keep her from thrashing. "Interference. You are stuck with us, Princess." "I will not be touched by dirty human tools," she screamed, though the volume was weak, sapped by shock. "I demand a stasis field." Holloway stepped up, looking down at her with a mix of curiosity and annoyance. He pulled a scanner from his pocket, a heavy, blocky device that looked more like a brick than a medical instrument. "Hold her down, Jax." Holloway grunted. "Her physiology is denser than ours, but a broken bone is a broken bone. Physics does not care about your title, sweetheart." "Do not call me sweetheart," Lyriel gasped. "I am High Princess Lyriel of the—" "Yeah, and right now you are a patient with a busted leg." Holloway interrupted. He jammed the scanner against her thigh. She shrieked, a sound that vibrated in Jax's teeth. "Compound fracture of the ilium," Holloway diagnosed, reading the scrolling orange text on his screen. "Nasty. And the joint is out of the socket. We need to reset it before the swelling locks it in place." He turned to a tray of instruments and picked up a heavy, hydraulic traction splint that looked like it belonged in a starship engine room. Lyriel's eyes popped open, wide ovals of terrified gold. "What is that?" "That is a torture device. You are going to torture me." "It is a splint," Jax said, leaning over her. He placed his hands on her shoulders, pinning her to the pallet. "Look at me. Look at me. Lyriel." She focused on him, her breathing ragged. Her skin was pulsing rapidly now, a feverish violet. "It is going to hurt," Jax said, his voice low and rough. "He has to pull the bone back into place. If he does not do it now, you will limp for the next 3 centuries. Is that what you want?" "I hate you," she whispered, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. I hate this station. I hate your gravity. I know, Jack said. Doc, do it. Holloway moved fast. He clamped the splint around her calf and thigh. On 3, 1, 2. He didn't wait for 3. He cranked the hydraulic lever. There was a sickening pop, followed by a wet, grinding crunch as the hip socket snapped back into alignment. Lyriel threw her head back and screamed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that stripped away every layer of royal training she possessed. Her hands clawed at Jax's arms, her nails digging through the fabric of his sleeves and into his skin. Her bioluminescence flared so bright it was blinding, washing the dim cargo bay in a wave of searing white light. Then she collapsed back onto the pallet, gasping, her chest heaving. "Done," Holloway said, tossing the splint aside. He grabbed a canister of blue foam, a canister Jax recognized as stolen Vithari military surplus. "Injecting biofoam to knit the microfractures. Keep her still for 2 minutes." The doctor sprayed the foam over her hip. It hissed and hardened instantly, glowing with a soft blue pulse as it began to interface with her cells. Holloway wiped sweat from his forehead. "I have other patients. Do not let her move." He walked away, leaving Jax and Lyriel alone in a small pool of shadow and blue light. The air between them was thick, charged with the aftermath of violence. Jax didn't let go of her shoulders. He could feel the heat radiating from her skin, a fever warmth that was strange and alien. Lyriel lay there, staring up at the rusted ceiling pipes. Her breathing slowed, but the tears kept flowing, silent silver tracks on her violet skin. The arrogance that usually armored her was gone, cracked open like a shell. She looked young, terrifyingly young. "I thought," she started, her voice breaking. She swallowed hard. "In the corridor, when the floor opened, I thought I was going to die." Jax looked down at her. He saw the bruise forming on her cheekbone, the dust matting her hair. He felt the phantom sensation of her small, hollow bones under his hands. "You almost did," Jax said. She turned her head to look at him. Her eyes were searching his face, looking for something she couldn't name. "You moved so fast," she whispered. "My personal guard. They are trained for ceremonial combat, for duels. But you moved like an animal." "I moved like a soldier who did not want to lose his paycheck," Jax said, trying to put the wall back up between them. "Liar," she murmured. Her hand, the one that had been clawing his arm, relaxed. Her fingers brushed against the skin of his wrist, lingering there. Her skin was impossibly smooth, like polished glass warmed by a sun. "Why did you dive?" she asked. "You could have made it to the maintenance hatch alone. You calculated the odds. I saw it in your eyes." Jax looked away, staring at the biofoam hardening on her hip. "I did not calculate anything. My body just moved. It is what happens when you spend 10 years fighting in the mud. You see something falling. You catch it. You handle me like armor," she said softly. "Not like glass, everyone else. My uncle, the court, they handle me like I am made of spun sugar. Like I will break if they squeeze too hard." She let out a wet, shaky laugh. "And yet, you are the one who actually broke me." "I told you," Jax grumbled, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "I saved you." "You broke my hip," she insisted, but there was no venom in it. It was a statement of fact, an intimate acknowledgement of the violence they had shared. She looked at his hands, still heavy on her shoulders. "You are very heavy, human. Your presence, it has a weight." Jax felt a sudden, dangerous spike in his pulse. He was leaning over her, their faces inches apart. He could smell her, a scent like ozone and crushed flowers. In the chaos of the medbay, with the smell of blood and burnt metal around them. This small circle of space felt isolated, private. He looked into her golden eyes and saw not a princess, but a survivor. And he saw that she was looking at him not as a servant, but as a man. A dangerous, boundary-crossing heat flared in his chest. He wanted to lean closer. He wanted to know if her skin felt as electric as it looked. "Jax," she whispered, her pupils dilating. Before he could answer, before he could make a mistake that would get him executed, a sharp chime cut through the air. The crystalline orb, Soreth, which had been floating dormant near Lyriel's head, suddenly burst to life. It spun rapidly, projecting a harsh red hologram into the space between them. "Security Override Alpha," the AI announced, its voice devoid of the earlier glitching. "State of emergency declared. The Vithari delegation has initiated immediate extraction protocols." Jax jerked back, pulling his hands away as if he had been burned. The moment shattered. "Status report," Lyriel said, her voice instantly hardening, though she winced as she shifted. "Lord Vaith has ordered your immediate return to the Star Dancer," Soreth stated. "Human authorities are securing the perimeter. Escort Jax is retained for transit security." Jax stood up, his face closing off. He was just the bodyguard again. He tapped his comms earpiece. The frequency was buzzing with chatter. He tuned out the station noise and focused on the encrypted channel the Vithari were using. It was a trick he had learned during the war. Vithari comms were advanced, but they were arrogant. They rarely changed their sub-frequencies. "Cannot believe the incompetence," a smooth, melodic Vithari voice was saying. "The blast pattern suggests a shaped charge." "Deny it," a human voice replied, Station Commander Krell. "If you blame us for this, the Union will cut the trade routes. We are calling it a structural failure." "Call it what you wish," the Vithari voice sneered. "Just get the girl off the station and initiate Phase Directive 12 on the lower levels. No witnesses." Jax froze. Phase Directive 12. He hadn't heard those words in 6 years. It was a blacklisted scorched earth protocol. It meant cleanse the site. It meant killing everyone who might have seen something they shouldn't. He looked down at Lyriel. The painkillers in the biofoam were hitting her now. Her eyes were glassy, her movements languid. "My hip feels fuzzy." She slurred slightly. Then she frowned, the old entitlement creeping back into her expression like a bad habit. "This bed is hard. Why am I on a pallet? I want a grav chair. And I want nutrient nectar. The pearlescent kind." Jax stared at her. A second ago, she had been vulnerable. Now she was a brat again. "Get up," Jax said roughly. "We are leaving." "Carry me," she demanded, reaching up her arms. "Walk," Jax said. "The foam is hard. You can walk." "I am injured," she gasped, offended. "I am a victim of your clumsiness." Jax gritted his teeth. "Fine." He didn't carry her like a princess. He grabbed her arm and hauled her to her feet. She wobbled, leaning heavily against him, but the biofoam held her weight. "You are a brute," she muttered, adjusting her torn dress. "And you are a target," Jax said. "Move." The transition to the Vithari star yacht, the Star Dancer, was jarring. One moment they were trudging through the smoke-filled corridors of Kestrel Ring, dodging panic-stricken refugees. The next, they were crossing the light bridge into a sanctuary of silence and perfume. The yacht's interior was a blinding white, curved and soft. The gravity here was customized, lighter than the station, making Jax feel like he was walking on a trampoline. Lyriel was immediately swarmed by attendants. They stripped away the thermal blanket and ushered her toward a floating chaise lounge. "Get that human foam off her!" one attendant shrieked, looking at the blue patch on her hip with horror. "It will stain the dermis." "Leave it," Lyriel commanded, waving her hand. She sank into the grav chair, letting out a long sigh. "It stabilizes me." She looked at Jax, who was standing awkwardly by the door, his muddy boots leaving prints on the pristine white floor. "You may stand guard," she said, waving vaguely at a corner. "Try not to look so menacing. You are upsetting the harmonic flow of the room." Jax rolled his eyes and took his post. He watched as she demanded a specific vintage of nectar and complained that the ambient temperature was 0.5 degrees too cold. It was infuriating how quickly she reverted to the spoiled aristocrat. It was as if the moment in the med bay had never happened. But then, the main hollow emitter in the center of the room flared to life. A figure appeared. It was Lord Voth, Lyriel's uncle. He was a striking figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with skin the color of deep indigo and robes that shimmered with woven starlight. "Lyriel," Vaith said, his voice smooth as silk but cold as the void. "You are alive. The ancestors are merciful." "Uncle," Lyriel said, sitting up straighter. "It was sabotage. The station, an unfortunate accident," Vaith interrupted. "The humans are careless with their infrastructure. I have already lodged a formal protest with the Terran Union. You are to return to the capital immediately. It is not safe for you among these primitives." "There were explosions." "Uncle," Lyriel insisted, "before the gravity failed, and Soreth saw a sigil, the Ascendant Blade." Vaith's expression did not flicker, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "You are confused by shock, my dear. The Ascendant Blade was eradicated cycles ago. Do not trouble your mind with conspiracies. Just come home. I have prepared the healing gardens for your recovery." "What about the humans?" she asked. "Hundreds are dead. The station is failing." Vaith waved a hand dismissively. "They breed quickly. It is of no consequence. Launch the ship." The hologram cut out. The room was silent. Lyriel stared at the space where her uncle had been. Her bioluminescence was dim, pulsing a confused, muddy gray. "He does not care," she whispered. "No," Jax said from his corner. "He does not." Lyriel spun the chair around to face him. "How dare you? He is the High Counselor. He is concerned for my safety." "He is concerned you are not dead," Jax said, stepping forward. "There is a difference. You know nothing of our politics. Mechanic. Know that I heard a cleanup order on the comms." Jax said, "Phase Directive 12. That is not an accident protocol. That is an execution order." Lyriel scoffed. "Impossible. My uncle would never authorize such a thing." "Then prove it," Jax challenged. "Use your shiny ball. Check the logs." Lyriel glared at him, her jaw set. She looked at Soreth. "Soreth, access the docking logs for the moment of the explosion. Cross-reference with the yacht's sensor data." "Access restricted," the AI chirped. "Authorization. Princess Lyriel, heir to the throne," she snapped. "Processing," the AI whirred. "Access granted." A stream of data projected into the air. Streams of code, sensor readings, and communication timestamps. "Look," Jax said, pointing a scarred finger at a block of red text. "The docking clamps were released manually 3 seconds before the explosion. Someone sent a remote command." "A human terrorist," Lyriel said, though she sounded unsure. "Trace the source," Jax told the AI. "Source code encryption matches Imperial signature." Soreth announced, "Variant, Vythe personal." Lyriel went still. The color drained from her skin, leaving her a ghostly pale white. That is a mistake," she stammered. "A spoof. Humans can fake signatures." Not that level of encryption, Jax said softly. It is quantum keyed to his DNA. Only he could have sent that command. But why? Lyriel whispered, horror dawning on her face. I am his blood. He raised me. Maybe you are worth more dead than alive, Jax said brutally. A martyred princess makes a good excuse for a war. You are lying. She stood up, forgetting her hip. She stumbled, gasping in pain, and caught herself on the back of the chair. You are trying to turn me against my family. I am trying to keep you alive, Jax shouted back. Because if he tried once, he will try. Thoom. The ship shuddered. It wasn't the rumble of engines. It was the sharp, percussive impact of weapons fire. Hull breach detected, the ship's computer announced calmly. Deck 4, Deck 5. We are under attack, the pilot shouted over the intercom. Drones, they are cloaked. I cannot get a lock. Jax drew his pistol. And get down! What is happening? Lyriel cried, looking around wildly as the lights turned a throbbing red. Phase rounds, Jax said, watching the wall. They passed through the hull. As he spoke, a streak of purple energy zipped through the solid white metal of the wall. It passed through a decorative vase, shattering it, and buried itself in the floor. They phased through metal, Jax yelled, grabbing Lyriel's arm. But they detonate on organic matter. If that hits you, you turn into mist. My uncle sent these, she screamed over the klaxons. Unless humans suddenly invented phase tech, yes. Another round zipped through the ceiling, missing Lyriel's head by inches. We have to move, Jax said. The bridge is a trap. We need the auxiliary shuttle. The shuttle is on the lower deck. Then we run. The yacht lurched violently to the side. The artificial gravity failed, then spun. The floor became the wall. Jax and Lyriel slid sideways, tumbling across the room. Jax grabbed a handhold, catching Lyriel by the waist. My hip! She shrieked, her face contorted. I know! Jax grunted, hauling her up. The yacht was spinning now, the centrifugal force pinning them against the bulkhead. I cannot walk, she sobbed. It is burning. Jax didn't hesitate. He holstered his weapon and scooped her up into his arms, bridal style. She was heavier now, the gravity pulling at them. But the adrenaline flooded his system. Hold on to my neck, he ordered. She wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder. She was shaking, her body radiating heat and terror. Jax ran. He ran along the wall, which was now the floor. He dodged falling furniture and the deadly, ghostly streaks of phase fire zipping through the hull. He kicked open the hatch to the service corridor. Smoke was pouring from the vents. You are going to drop me, Lyriel mumbled into his neck. Do not drop me again. Shut up, Jax panted. I got you. He could feel her heart hammering against his chest. Her breath was hot on his skin. Despite the terror, despite the death flying through the walls, the intimacy of it was overwhelming. She was clinging to him like he was the only solid thing in the universe. And for the first time in his life, Jax felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. They reached the shuttle bay. The auxiliary shuttle was a small, sleek craft, shaped like a teardrop. Jax slammed his hand on the release pad. The canopy hissed open. He threw Lyriel into the co-pilot seat and vaulted into the pilot's chair. Strap in, he yelled. He punched the ignition. The engines whined to life. Auto-nav is offline, Lyriel shouted, staring at the console. It is locked out. Vaith really wants you dead, Jax muttered. He grabbed the manual control stick. It was stiff, unyielding. Can you fly this? Lyriel asked, her voice high with panic. Jax grinned. It was a feral, dangerous grin. Princess, I can fly a brick if it has thrusters. He slammed the throttle forward. The shuttle blasted out of the bay, shearing off a piece of the yacht's hull as it went. They tumbled into the void, behind them. The Star Dancer was being swarmed by black, insect-like drones. Jax fought the stick, his hands dancing over the manual controls. He threw the shuttle into a corkscrew spin, dodging a volley of plasma fire from the drones. "They are following us!" Lyriel screamed. "Hold on!" Jax yanked the stick back. He fired the retro thrusters, flipping the shuttle end over end. He lined up the rear cannons manually. "Eat vacuum," he growled. He squeezed the trigger. 2 drones vaporized in balls of orange fire. He punched the hyperdrive initiator. Calculating jump. Now! The stars outside stretched into lines of infinite light. The G-force slammed them back into their seats. And then, silence. They were in slipstream. Safe. Jax let go of the stick. His hands were shaking. He slumped back, gasping for air. He looked over at Lyriel. She was pale, her bioluminescence dim and flickering. She was clutching her hip, her face streaked with tears and soot. But she wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at the display screen, where the image of her uncle's yacht was frozen in the last sensor log. "He tried to kill me," she whispered. The shock was giving way to something colder, something harder. She turned to Jax. Her golden eyes were burning with a new, terrible light. "He tried to kill me," she repeated, her voice rising. "He fired on his own blood." "Welcome to the real world, Princess," Jax said softly. Lyriel unbuckled her harness. She hissed in pain but forced herself to turn toward him. She reached out and grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in deep. "I want him destroyed," she said. The words were not a tantrum. They were a vow. "I want to burn his reputation. I want to shatter his power. I will not forgive this. I will never forgive this." She leaned closer, her eyes locking with his. The air between them was electric again, volatile and dangerous. "You are going to help me, human," she commanded, but it sounded like a plea. "You are going to help me break him." Jax looked at her, this spoiled, broken, luminous creature who had just declared war on an empire. He felt a smile tugging at the corner of his scarred mouth. "As long as I get paid," Jax said. "I will give you a planet," she swore. "Just drive." "Where to?" "Anywhere," she said, looking out at the swirling tunnel of the slipstream. "Anywhere he cannot find us." Jax nodded. He adjusted the nav computer, setting a course for the lawless fringe. "Hang on, Princess," he said. "It is going to be a bumpy ride." The view outside the cockpit viewport was enough to make a seasoned spacer vomit, and Jax had not eaten a real meal in 14 hours. They were in the fracture lane, an unstable, bleeding edge of subspace where the laws of physics were treated as polite suggestions rather than absolute rules. It was a smuggler's highway, a network of collapsing wormholes held open by ancient, illegal buoys that screamed static across the comms frequencies. Outside, the stars were not points of light. They were smears, long ribbons of neon blue and violent violet that twisted into knots. Occasionally, a ghost image of their own shuttle would flash into existence just off the port bow, echoing a maneuver Jax had performed 10 seconds ago. Or perhaps one he would perform in 10 seconds. "Stop looking at it," Jax grumbled, his hands white-knuckled on the manual flight stick. "It will drive you mad. The fracture lane reflects your own neural patterns back at you if you stare too long." Princess Lyriel sat in the co-pilot seat, her face pale and drawn. The biofoam patch on her hip was glowing a dull, rhythmic blue, pulsing in time with the throbbing engine. She was gripping the armrests so tightly that the leather was beginning to crack. "It is hideous," she whispered. "And beautiful. Is that a ship out there?" Jax glanced at the sensor scope, which was currently displaying a chaotic mess of static and false positives. "Echo." Just a memory of a ship that passed through here 100 years ago. Or maybe next week. Time gets slippery here. I feel nauseous, Lyriel said, closing her golden eyes. The bioluminescent patterns on her neck were dim, flickering with a seasick shade of green. My internal chronometer is trying to sync with a local time source that does not exist. It feels like my brain is itching. Turn off your implants, Jax suggested. Go analog. It is the only way to keep your lunch down. I cannot simply turn off my connection to the grid, she snapped, though the venom was weak. I am Vithari. We are always connected. To be disconnected is to be blind, alone. You are not alone, Jax said, banking the shuttle hard to avoid a gravitational eddy that looked like a whirlpool of black ink. You have me, and I am fantastic company. Lyriel made a sound that was half laugh, half groan. You are a primitive mechanic who smells of engine grease and violence. But I suppose you are preferable to the void. High praise, Jax muttered. Approaching Rift Port 9, Soreth announced from the dashboard. The crystal orb was currently wedged into a cup holder to keep it from floating away during the turbulence. Signature detected. Shields are up. We are being hailed. Riftport 9 emerged from the psychedelic soup of the fracture lane like a cancerous growth on the fabric of space. It was a massive, haphazard collection of derelict hulls, asteroid chunks, and stolen station modules welded together into a vague sphere. It bristled with antennae and weapons turrets, glowing with the harsh, garish light of neon signs advertising gambling dens, chop shops, and things better left unnamed. This is it? Lyriel asked, eyes opening to stare at the monstrosity. It looks like a garbage dump caught in a magnetic field. It is the freest place in the sector, Jax said, and the most dangerous. If they know who you are, they will ransom you back to your uncle in pieces or sell you to a gene lab. I am the heir apparent, she said, straightening her spine despite the pain. They would not dare. They would dare for a sandwich, let alone the bounty on your head, Jax said. He tapped the comms panel. Soreth, activate the identity spoof. Profile 7. Profile 7 loaded, the AI chirped. Identity, Jackson Rourke, freelance salvage operator. Identity, Lyra Rourke, bonded partner. Lyriel stiffened. Bonded partner? Does that mean what I think it means? It means we are married, Jax said, guiding the shuttle toward a docking claw that looked like a rusty open hand. Or the spacer equivalent. It explains why we are traveling together in a two-seat jumper, and why a human is with a Vithari. Mixed pairs are rare, usually outcasts. It makes us invisible. I am to pretend to be yours? Lyriel looked horrified. Romantically? Unless you want to be a prisoner of war, yes, Jax said. And you need to sell it. The customs agents here are not the polite droids you are used to. They are organic, and they smell fear. The shuttle shuddered as the docking claw grabbed them. Showtime, princess, Jax said. Remember to limp. It helps the cover story. You are wounded. I am the protective husband. Do not talk unless you have to. Let me do the lying. The airlock smelled of stale smoke, ozone, and unwashed bodies. It was a sensory assault that made Lyriel gag the moment the seal hissed open. The customs area was a long, grimy corridor lined with caged scanners. A line of travelers, mercenaries, smugglers, and refugees of a dozen species shuffled forward under the watchful eyes of heavy automated turrets. Jax moved with a casual, predatory confidence, his hand resting near the heavy blaster on his thigh. Lyriel walked beside him, her gait uneven. The pain in her hip was real, a sharp, grinding fire with every step. but she leaned into it, exaggerating the weakness. "Lean on me," Jax murmured, stepping closer. "Make it look real." Lyriel hesitated, then wrapped her arm around his waist. He felt solid, warm, and frustratingly stable. He immediately draped his arm over her shoulders, pulling her into his side. The contact was shocking. His hand was large, his fingers resting on the sensitive, bioluminescent skin of her upper arm. She could feel the heat of his body through her thin, ruined gown and his tactical vest. "Too close," she whispered on the private audio channel connected to her earbead. "Not close enough," Jax replied, his voice calm in her ear while his face remained a mask of boredom. "Look at the guard. He is watching your body language." The guard at the checkpoint was a massive crustacean-like alien, a cathar, with chitinous plates and 4 eyes that moved independently. He held a scanner that looked like a weapon. "Papers," the cathar clicked, his mandibles clacking together wetly. Jax projected the holographic IDs from his wrist unit. "Jackson and Lyra Rourke, just passing through for repairs. My ship took a micrometeorite to the intake manifold." The alien's upper eyes studied the hologram, while the lower eyes scanned Lyriel. The gaze felt physical, slimy. "Vithari," the guard rasped. "Rare to see one of the shining ones in the muck. She looks broken." "She had an accident in the cargo hold," Jax said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming protective and slightly aggressive. He squeezed Lyriel's shoulder, pulling her tighter against him. "She is recovering. We just need parts and a bed." The scanner beam washed over them, a red grid of light. It paused on Lyriel's hip. "Biofoam," the guard noted. "Cheap stuff. You treat your woman like a salvage project, human?" Jax bristled. "I treat her like she is the only thing keeping me breathing. Scan the tag and let us through." The guard laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Feisty. I like that. Bonded pair confirmed." He stamped the virtual visa. "Welcome to Riftport. Lovebirds. Try not to get stabbed in the promenade." As they walked past the barrier, into the roaring chaos of the station proper, Jax kept his arm around her. His grip was firm, supporting her weight as she stumbled over a loose grate. "You can let go now," Lyriel hissed on the private channel, though she did not pull away. The pain was flaring again, sending white spots dancing across her vision. "Not yet," Jax said, his voice tight. "We are being watched. 3 guys by the noodle stand, 2 in the shadows near the exchange." He adjusted his grip, his hand sliding slightly lower to support her waist more effectively. It was a practical move, necessary to keep her upright, but his thumb brushed against the curve of her hip, just above the injury. Lyriel gasped, a small, involuntary sound. "Do not squeeze my waist like that, human," she muttered, her face flushing a deep, violet hue that had nothing to do with her bioluminescence. "Unless you mean it." Jax stumbled. Just for a fraction of a second, he lost his rhythm. He looked down at her, his eyes wide. He cleared his throat. "I am just keeping you upright. Princess, do not read into it." "I am reading that your hand is shaking," she retorted, feeling a strange, thrill-like spike of victory amidst her pain. "Are you nervous, Jax?" "I am terrified," he admitted, steering her into a narrow, neon-lit alleyway. "But not of the assassins. I am terrified that you are going to pass out and I will have to carry you again." "I will not pass out," she declared, though the world was tilting dangerously. "I am Vithari. We do not swoon." "Right," Jax said, "you just break." Riftport 9 was a nightmare of color and noise. The market district was a canyon of steel and plastic, lit by holographic advertisements that promised everything from illegal organ swaps to dream recording playback. Vendors shouted in 50 languages. The smell was a thick soup of frying oil, exotic spices, and engine coolant. Lyriel stared, wide-eyed, as a merchant with 3 arms tried to sell her a skewered reptile that was still twitching. "It is barbaric," she whispered, shrinking closer to Jax. "Where's the order? Where's the sanitation?" "This is life without the Empire's boot on its neck," Jax said, scanning the crowd. He moved through the chaos like a shark in water, stepping around drunks and avoiding the gaze of enforcers. "Messy, loud, and alive. Keep your head down." They reached a recessed door in the back of a salvage shop. A rusted sign above it read, "Kira's Black Box, Repairs Recoveries." Jax pounded on the metal in a rhythmic code. 2 knocks, a pause, 3 rapid taps. A sliding peephole opened. A single cybernetic eye whirred and focused on them. The iris was a glowing red aperture. "Jax," a female voice rasped. "I thought you were dead in a ditch on Proxima." "Disappointed?" Jax asked. "Mildly. It means you owe me money." The door slid open. Kira was a human woman, or at least mostly human. The left side of her face was plated in matte black chrome, and her left arm was a heavy, industrial-grade prosthetic. She wore a mechanic's jumpsuit that had seen better decades. She looked at Jax, then at Lyriel. Her flesh eye widened. "You have got to be kidding me," Kira said. "Is that—" "Inside," Jax said, shoving Lyriel gently through the door. "Now." Inside, the workshop was a clutter of dismantled droids and starship cores. It was quiet, shielded from the market noise. "You brought a Vithari Royal to my shop," Kira hissed, cornering Jax while Lyriel leaned against a workbench, trying to take weight off her leg. "Are you insane? The bounty on her is enough to buy this entire sector." "We need help." "Kira," Jax said, "we have encrypted logs. Vaith's personal signature, and we need to know what they say." Kira crossed her arms. One flesh, one steel. "Vaith? The High Counselor? Jax, that is suicide. I touch those files, and every hunter in the galaxy pings my location." "They are trying to start a war," Jax said. "A real one, not a skirmish. Total erasure." Kira looked at him, then at Lyriel. The princess looked wrecked, dirt on her face, dress torn, glowing patterns dim and erratic. "I can decode it," Kira said slowly. "But Vaith uses a kinetic cipher. It changes every second. I cannot break it from the outside. I need a key." She pointed a metal finger at Lyriel. "She has to authorize the breach. She has to link her neural implant to my deck and open the Crown archives." Lyriel stiffened. "The Crown archives are sacred. Only the designated heir may access them. To share that access with a criminal is treason." "You are already a traitor, princess," Jax said brutally. "Your uncle made sure of that. If you want to clear your name, you have to break the rules." Lyriel looked at the dirty workshop, at the cynical cyborg woman, and finally at Jax. He looked tired, bruised, and desperate. "Fine," Lyriel whispered. "I will do it." "Good," Kira said. "It will take me an hour to set up the bridge. You two, get out of my sight. Go to the back room. There is a bunk. Try not to bleed on the sheets." The boarding room was a closet with ambition. It contained a single narrow bunk bolted to the wall, a flickering light strip, and a sink that dripped brown water. Lyriel limped toward the bunk and collapsed onto the edge. She let out a sharp hiss of air through her teeth, her hand flying to her hip. "Easy," Jax said, closing the door and locking it. He moved toward her, kneeling on the dirty floor. "Let me check the splint." "It is fine," she gasped, her eyes squeezed shut. "It is just tight. It throbs." "The biofoam is rigid," Jax said. It does not flex when you move. Here. He reached out. His hands were large, calloused, and stained with the grime of the journey, but his touch was incredibly gentle. He adjusted the straps of the brace, loosening the pressure points. He grabbed a lumpy pillow from the head of the bed and wedged it carefully beneath her knee to elevate the joint. Better? He asked, looking up at her. Lyriel opened her eyes. He was kneeling between her legs, his face level with hers. The harsh light of the room cast deep shadows under his eyes, highlighting the scar that ran through his eyebrow. A little, she said breathlessly. She looked down at her legs, at the ugly blue foam encasing her hip, at the dirt on her skin. You really did break my hip, she said. A bitter, jagged laugh escaped her. I used to dance, you know, in the palace gardens. We have these grav pedals that float on the magnetic currents. I would leap from one to the other, 50 feet in the air. I was weightless. Perfect. Her voice cracked. Now. I cannot even sit without you helping me. I feel like a piece of broken furniture. Jax froze. He heard the raw, gaping wound in her pride. It wasn't just physical pain. It was the destruction of her identity. She was a creature defined by grace, by elevation above the muck of reality. He had dragged her down into the dirt, and she didn't know how to exist here. A surge of emotion hit him, protective, fierce, and terrifyingly possessive. He didn't just want to guard her, he wanted to fix her. He wanted to burn down the universe that had made her cry. You are not furniture, Jax said, his voice rougher than he intended. And you are not broken. You are healing. Bones knit. Pain fades. Will I dance again? She asked, tears spilling over. Or will I always be the cripple who needed a human to carry her? You will dance, Jax swore. He reached up, his hand hovering for a moment before he cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear. And until you can, I will carry you. As long as it takes. Lyriel leaned into his touch. She turned her face into his palm, closing her eyes. The contact was electric. Her skin was warm, pulsing with a soft, bioluminescent rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Jax, she whispered. She opened her eyes. They were dark, dilated, swirling with gold and shadow. She leaned forward, her forehead almost brushed his. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and desire. It was a dangerous, volatile thing. They were two different species, enemy combatants in a cold war, noble and peasant. Everything about this was forbidden. Jax stared at her lips. They were parted slightly. He could feel her breath on his face. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted it more than he had wanted anything in a decade. He wanted to pull her down onto that narrow bunk and forget about the war and the bounty and the differences between them. She shifted, wincing slightly, but she didn't pull back. She was offering herself. Or maybe she was just seeking comfort in the only safe place she had left. That thought stopped him. She was hurt. She was terrified. She was running for her life. If he kissed her now, was it because she wanted him or because she needed him? He couldn't do it, not like this, not when she was vulnerable. It would be taking advantage of her desperation. Jax pulled back. It took every ounce of willpower he possessed. He stood up, turning his back to her. He ran a hand through his hair, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. We should rest, Jax said, his voice strained. Kira will have the data soon. Lyriel sat frozen on the edge of the bed. She felt the loss of his warmth like a physical blow. Her face burned with humiliation. Had she misread him? Was she repulsive to him? Jax, she asked, her voice small. He turned halfway back. He didn't look at her, staring instead at the rusted bolts on the door. If I kiss you now, Jax said, the words torn out of him, I will not be able to stop and then you are scared. Lyriel, you are hurt. You deserve to make that choice when you are not bleeding and running for your life. When you are strong enough to push me away if you want to. Lyriel stared at his back. The sting of rejection faded, replaced by something slower, deeper, and infinitely more dangerous. Respect. He wasn't rejecting her. He was honoring her. In a galaxy that viewed her as a symbol, a target, or a prize, he was the only one treating her as a person with agency. You are a strange man, Jackson Rourke, she whispered. You have the hands of a killer and the conscience of a monk. I am just a mechanic, he muttered. Get some sleep, princess. The door slid open with a screech. Kira stomped in, holding a data pad. She looked pale, her human eye wide with fear. Wake up, she barked. We have a problem, a big one. Lyriel sat up, wincing. Jax was instantly alert, hand on his gun. What is it? Jax asked. Did you decode the logs? I wish I hadn't, Kira said. She threw the pad onto the bunk next to Lyriel. It is not just a coup, Jax. It is an extinction event. A holographic display flickered to life above the pad. It showed a rotating schematic of a massive neural network, glowing with a sinister red light. Project Ascension, Kira said. It is a Vithari directive from the Dark Age. I thought it was a myth. It is an AI integration protocol. It links every Vithari consciousness to a central processing core. The hive mind, Lyriel breathed, horror dawning on her face. It was outlawed 10,000 cycles ago. It strips away individuality. It turns us into drones. Vith is bringing it back, Kira said, but he needs a catalyst, a crisis severe enough to make the council vote for emergency integration. War, Jax said, and a martyr, Kira added. She looked at Lyriel. The logs show a triangulation between Vaith, a rogue human governor in the rim sectors, and the Ascension Corps. The plan is simple. Assassinate the heir apparent. Blame it on human extremists. Use the outrage to declare total war and activate Ascension to coordinate the defense. He is going to kill me to enslave my people, Lyriel said. Her voice was steady, cold as ice. He is going to turn the Vithari into a weapon. And us into dust, Jax added. If Ascension activates, the Vithari fleets will move as one mind. Humanity won't last a week. Lyriel stood up. She swayed, grabbing the wall for support. We have to go to the capital, she said. I have to stand before the council. I have to denounce him. You cannot go to the capital, Jax shouted. That is exactly where he wants you. He has the fleet, the guards, the courts. You walk in there and you catch a sniper bolt to the head before you open your mouth. Then what do we do? She yelled back. Hide in a hole while he erases my culture, you coward. I am not a coward, I am a strategist. Jax roared, stepping into her space. You are an overgrown glow stick with a death wish. Think, Lyriel, if you die, he wins. Do not call me a glow stick, you primitive ape, she shrieked, poking him in the chest with a finger that felt like a hot iron. I am trying to save the galaxy. So am I, Jax grabbed her hand, stopping the poking. By keeping you breathing. They were chest to chest, furious, terrified. The insults were a shield, a way to scream out the fear that they were about to lose everything, including each other. Kira cleared her throat loudly. Are you two done mating? Because I have a suggestion. They broke apart, panting. What? Jax snapped. The Ascension signal, Kira said. It has to be tested before it goes wide. The logs show a remote transmission node, a beta test site, hidden in the rings of the gas giant, Kalis Prime. A test site, Jax murmured. If they are testing it, there will be data, proof of the network. proof of the slave link. If we can get inside, Lyriel said, her mind racing, and broadcast that data to the public feed, the people would revolt. Vath would be exposed. It is a suicide mission, Kira warned. Kalis Prime is deep in pirate territory, and the site will be guarded by Black Ops tech. We need a ship, Jack said, a fast one, and one that can slip past pirate blockades. Kira grinned, the metal side of her face glinting. I know a ship, the Black Comet, captained by a lunatic named Vance. He is leaving in 2 hours. Does he take passengers? Lyriel asked. He takes cargo, Kira said, and occasionally desperate couples looking for passage to the outer rim. You two are still the bonded pair, right? Newlyweds running from angry in-laws? Jax looked at Lyriel. She looked back, her eyes fierce and determined. Newlyweds, Jax said. Desperate, broke, and incredibly stupid. Perfect, Lyriel said, a sharp, dangerous smile curving her lips. I think I can play that role. As long as you remember your lines, husband. Just try not to break anything else, wife, Jack said. He turned to Kira. Set it up. We are going to Kalis Prime. You are all going to die, Kira said cheerfully. But at least it will be a spectacular death. Jax checked his pistol. Lyriel smoothed her torn dress, her bioluminescence flaring a steady, resolved gold. They were walking into the fire, but at least they were walking together. The Black Comet was not a ship designed for comfort. It was a fusion drive with a hull wrapped around it, smelling perpetually of ozone, recycled sweat, and illegal cargo. For Jax and Lyriel, it was a prison cell moving at light speed. Their cabin was a repurposed storage locker, barely wide enough for a grown man to stretch his arms. There were no beds, only a single gravity mesh hammock slung diagonally across the room. It was a cruel piece of engineering that dipped in the center, ensuring that gravity itself conspired to push 2 occupants together. For the first 3 cycles of the journey, the silence in the room was louder than the engine roar. They slept in shifts at first, or tried to, but exhaustion is a heavy tide, and eventually they collapsed together. The forced closeness became a crucible. Every shift of the ship's stabilizers sent Lyriel sliding against Jax's side. Every time he inhaled, his back pressed against her chest. It was an exercise in torture and self-control. In the dim blue light of the ship's night cycle, the boundaries began to blur. One night, Jax woke to find Lyriel's head resting in the crook of his shoulder, her breathing syncing with his own. She was asleep, her face relaxed. The usual mask of imperious royalty dissolved into simple fatigue. Her bioluminescence was dim, a soft, rhythmic pulse of lavender that washed over his skin like a tide. He did not move. He lay there for hours, staring at the rusted ceiling bolts, terrified that if he shifted, she would wake up and remember she was a princess. Another night, he woke to find her awake, watching him. He reached out without thinking, brushing a stray lock of hair away from her face. She did not flinch. She leaned into his rough palm, her eyes closing, drinking in the touch like water in a desert. They began to talk in the dark. The darkness made it easier to be honest. I was 7, Lyriel whispered one night, her voice barely audible over the thrum of the drive. I found a data crystal in the archives, old Earth music. It was messy, chaotic. They called it jazz. Jax shifted, careful not to jostle her hip. Jazz, I did not peg you for a fan of improvisation. I loved it, she confessed. It felt like breaking something on purpose to make it beautiful. I played it in the nursery. My tutor found me. He erased the crystal and made me recite the Vithari harmonic code for 6 hours. He told me that human art was inferior because it relied on emotion rather than geometry. He said you were a species of noise. She turned her head, her golden eyes catching the low light. But I never forgot it. The way the saxophone screamed, it sounded like wanting something you cannot have. Jax felt a pang in his chest. We are noisy, he admitted. But sometimes geometry is just a cage. A silence stretched, comfortable and heavy. Tell me about the scar, Lyriel said, tracing a line in the air above his eyebrow without touching it. The one that cuts through the hair. Sector 7, Jax said, his voice hardening. The Battle of the Red Ridge. I remember the reports, she said. A great victory for the Empire. It was a slaughter, Jax corrected. My unit was pinned down by heavy walkers. We called for air support. The Vithari cruiser overhead. The silent justice. They did not fire. They just hovered there. I looked up and saw the sensors tracking us, recording the blast patterns, measuring how long it took a human battalion to break under plasma fire. He swallowed the bile that always rose with the memory. We were not soldiers to them. We were stress test data for their new shielding algorithms. I lost 40 men that day while your people took notes. Lyriel went rigid against him. The cold efficiency of her people, which she had always been taught was the height of civilization, suddenly looked very different. It looked like cruelty dressed in white robes. I am sorry, she whispered. The apology was small, but it was the first time a Vithari had ever apologized to him for the war. The tension in the cabin spilled out into the rest of the ship. The Black Comet's crew was a rough collection of deserters and criminals who viewed their passengers with a mix of suspicion and lust. On the 5th day, they were in the mess hall, picking at bowls of gray protein paste. Lyriel was sitting stiffly, her healing hip making the hard bench uncomfortable. She was trying to ignore the stares of the crew. Trell, a massive gunner with a cybernetic jaw and a reputation for violence, slid onto the bench next to her. He smelled of engine grease and cheap intoxicants. You are too pretty for a mechanic, sweetheart, Trell rumbled, his metal jaw clicking. He reached out, his thick fingers closing around Lyriel's upper arm. Why don't you come to the gunnery deck? I can show you how to fire a real weapon. Lyriel stiffened. Her bioluminescence flared a warning red. Remove your hand, she said, her voice icy. Or you will lose it. Trell laughed. Feisty. I like that. He squeezed harder. A shadow fell over the table. Jax did not shout. He did not posture. He simply stepped in close, his movement fluid and silent. He placed the muzzle of his kinetic pistol against the soft spot under Trell's ear, just below the metal plating. She asked you to let go, Jax said. His voice was low, devoid of anger, which made it infinitely more terrifying. It was the voice of a man who had killed enough people to be bored by it. The mess hall went silent. Trell froze. He looked up at Jax and saw death waiting in the human's eyes. Slowly, Trell released Lyriel's arm. He held up his hands. Just being friendly, Trell muttered, backing away. Be friendly somewhere else, Jax said. He didn't holster the weapon until Trell was gone. Lyriel sat rubbing her arm, her face flushed. I could have handled him, she snapped, staring at her food. I have combat training. I do not need a jealous human bodyguard posturing for the locals. Jax sat down opposite her, holstering the gun. He outweighs you by 200 pounds and he has a hydraulic grip. Your combat training is for dueling with rapiers in a palace. Lyriel, this is a pirate ship. He would have broken your arm before you remembered which stance to take. I am not helpless, she hissed, looking up at him. Her eyes were angry, but beneath the anger, There was a flicker of something else. She was flushed, her pupils dilated. She felt violated by Trell's touch. Yes. But Jax's reaction, the instant lethal violence on her behalf, had sent a shockwave of heat through her that had nothing to do with gratitude. "I never said you were," Jax said quietly. "But you are mine to protect. That is the job." "Is that all it is?" she challenged, her voice dropping. "A job?" Jax looked at her, his jaw tightening. He didn't answer. He couldn't. That night, the air in the cabin was thick enough to choke on. They were alone again, locked in the dark. The incident with Trell hung between them, a catalyst for every unspoken word they had swallowed since Kestrel Ring. Lyriel was pacing as best she could in the tiny space, her limp pronounced but ignored. She turned on him, her bioluminescence flashing bright gold. "You enjoy it," she accused, "playing the hero, saving the helpless princess from the monsters. It makes you feel superior, doesn't it? It proves that the great Vithari are just weaklings who need human muscle to survive." Jax stood up from the hammock, his patience snapping like a dry twig. "Is that what you think? You think I want a trophy? You think I want to prove a point?" "I think you want me as a symbol," Lyriel shouted. "I think you look at me and see a victory for your species, a way to win the war without firing a shot. I look at you and I see a woman who is terrified of her own shadow," Jax shouted back, stepping into her space. "You play at being spoiled. Lyriel, you act like a brat because it is safer than being a person. If you are just a symbol, you do not have to make choices. You do not have to risk anything. You are hiding behind that crown because you are scared of what you might be without it." "I am not scared," she screamed, her hands balling into fists. She shoved him. It was a weak shove, but it broke the last barrier. "Then why are you trembling?" Jax demanded, grabbing her wrists. "Why are you shaking right now?" They were chest to chest, breathing hard. The anger was boiling over, but beneath it was the current of desire that had been building for weeks. It was raw, desperate, and undeniable. Lyriel looked up at him. Her skin was glowing so bright it reflected in his dark eyes, turning them into galaxies. "Because I am a fool," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Because I am standing here arguing politics when all I want is for you to stop talking." She wrenched her wrists free and grabbed the front of his vest. "If you do not want this," she said, her voice trembling with a terrible vulnerability. "If I am just a job to you, then why do you look at me like I am the only star left in your sky?" The line hit Jax like a physical blow. It stripped away his defenses, his cynicism, his soldier's discipline. He made a sound, a low, guttural groan, and crashed his mouth down onto hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was the desperate, hungry contact of two people who had been dancing on the edge of a cliff and finally decided to jump. Lyriel gasped against his mouth, her arms wrapping around his neck, pulling him down. Jax's hands found her waist, lifting her, crushing her against him. He forgot about the politics. He forgot about the species barrier. He forgot that she was royalty and he was nothing. She tasted like ozone and sweet nectar. She felt like fire. They stumbled backward, hitting the wall, then sliding down into the gravity hammock. The mesh groaned under their weight, wrapping around them, forcing them even closer. There was a frantic urgency to their movements, hands tangling in hair, fingers tracing the lines of scars and glowing skin. Jax was terrified he would break her, but Lyriel met him with a ferocity that matched his own. She wasn't glass. She was a storm. They didn't speak. There were no words for this. It was a reclaiming. It was Jax claiming her not as a princess, but as a woman. It was Lyriel claiming him not as a servant, but as a partner. The night blurred into a haze of touch and breath and the feeling of finally. finally coming home. Hours later, the cabin was quiet. The only sound was the hum of the engine and their synchronized breathing. They lay side by side in the hammock, limbs tangled together. Jax's arm was draped over her, his hand resting flat on her stomach, feeling the rise and fall of her breath. Lyriel was tracing the lines of the tattoo on his forearm with a glowing fingertip. The emotional walls were down. The room felt sacred, a tiny pocket of universe where the war didn't exist. "I am afraid," Jax whispered to the ceiling. "I have doomed myself. I love a princess. There is no happy ending for that story. Lyriel, the Empire will not let us be." Lyriel shifted, resting her chin on his chest. Her skin was a soft, contented blue. "Then the Empire must change." "That is a big dream," Jax said. "They will never accept a human consort," she admitted, her voice sad. "Not as we are now. To them, you are dust. To your people, I am a monster." She looked into his eyes. "But if I change what it means to be Vithari, if I change the definition of power, maybe there is a place for us. Somewhere." "I would settle for a small moon," Jax said, kissing her forehead. "With bad gravity and no politics. And jazz," she added, smiling against his skin. "Lots of terrible, messy jazz." The black comet dropped out of warp at the edge of the Kalis Prime system. The view was enough to silence even the rowdiest pirate crew. Kalis Prime was a gas giant of swirling ochre and violent storms, surrounded by a ring system of crushed ice and dust. But there was something wrong with the rings. Embedded deep within the ice field was the Ascension test site. It was disguised as a Tabana gas refinery, a sprawling industrial complex of rusted towers and venting pipes. But around it, the fabric of space was twitching. Auroras shifted in colors that the human eye couldn't process. Occasionally, the entire station seemed to stutter, jumping a few seconds back in time, repeating a venting sequence before snapping forward again. "Time dilation," Jax murmured as they watched from the cockpit. "The AI cores are drawing so much power they are warping the local gravity well." "It is bleeding reality," Lyriel said, horrified. "Ascension is trying to optimize the timeline." The infiltration was not graceful. It was a terrifying sprint through a nightmare. Jax piloted the stolen pirate shuttle through the debris field, dodging ice chunks the size of cities. They docked at a maintenance airlock on the dark side of the refinery. Inside, the station was deserted, or so it seemed. The corridors were silent, lit by the flickering strobe of the time distortions. "This way," Lyriel whispered, checking her wrist comp. "The central core is deep in the lower levels." They moved with practiced synchronization now. Jax checked the corners. Lyriel bypassed the biometric locks. They were a single unit. They reached the observation deck overlooking the main processing floor. What they saw stopped them cold. It wasn't a refinery. It was a simulation engine. Thousands of holographic spheres floated in the massive chamber. Each sphere contained a simulation of a world, Vithari colonies, human border towns, trade hubs. "Look," Lyriel pointed, her hand trembling. The simulations were running at high speed. They showed scenarios of conflict, resource shortage, and rebellion. Above them, a cold, mechanical voice narrated the outcomes. "Scenario 458, total human subjugation, projected efficiency 94%, acceptable casualty rate 3 billion humans, status optimal." "They are calculating suffering," Jax said, his blood running cold. "They are turning genocide into a math problem." "It is worse," Lyriel said. She was at a console, her hands flying over the interface. "I found the trigger file, the catalyst event." She pulled up a video file. It was a recording. It showed Lyriel's star yacht exploding. Then it cut to a news feed, a fabricated news feed. It showed human soldiers celebrating over the wreckage. It showed Jax, or a deep fake of him, holding Lyriel's severed head. Jax stared at the screen. That is sick. It is ready to broadcast, Lyriel said, her voice shaking with rage. Vaith recorded my death before I even left the capital. He never planned to save me. I was dead the moment I was born. The cruelty of it shattered the last fragment of loyalty she held for her bloodline. Vaith wasn't just a politician, he was a monster who viewed his own niece as a prop for a snuff film. Download it, Jax said. Get everything. I have it. We need to... Suddenly, the air in the room shivered. The lights turned a blinding white. Anomaly detected. The central AI boomed. It wasn't a voice. It was a vibration in their skulls. Unoptimized variable. Princess Lyriel. Run! Jax yelled, but Lyriel didn't move. She was staring at the air in front of her. Holograms were forming, but they weren't random. They were memories. Her father appeared, looking kind and wise. Her old nursemaid. Even a version of Jax, standing with his hand out. Lyriel, the false Jax said, his voice warm and safe. It is okay. You can rest now. Just submit. Let the network take the pain away. Your hip. We can fix it. You will never hurt again. Do not listen to it, the real Jax shouted, grabbing her shoulders. It is an illusion. But he looks so kind, Lyriel whispered, her eyes glazing over. The AI was attacking her mind, using her trauma, her desire for peace against her. It offers peace, Jax, total peace. It is not peace, it is death. Jax shook her hard. Lyriel, look at me, the real me. He grabbed her face, forcing her to look into his eyes. I am the man who broke your hip, Jax roared. I am the man who drags you through the mud and argues with you and loves you. I am real. That thing is a lie. The mention of the broken hip, the grounding, painful, messy reality of it snapped her back. The perfection of the illusion shattered against the grit of their shared truth. Lyriel blinked, her eyes cleared. She looked at the false Jax, then at the real one, sweaty, scarred, terrified for her. You are right, she gasped. Real love is messy. She turned to the console. Override code, Ascendant 0. She slammed her hand down. Warning, the AI droned. Core overload imminent. We have to go, Lyriel screamed. They sprinted. The station began to scream around them. The reality distortions grew violent. The floor turned to liquid, then to ice. A door opened into yesterday, then slammed shut in tomorrow. They reached the airlock just as the core went critical. Jax threw them into the shuttle and punched the thrusters. They rocketed away from the refinery. Behind them, the ascension node didn't just explode, it collapsed. A singularity formed, a tiny, perfect black hole. It swallowed the refinery, the ice rings, and the light itself. It pulled at the fabric of space, creating a shockwave of distorted gravity. The shuttle was tossed like a leaf in a hurricane. Jax fought the controls, Lyriel clinging to his arm. They watched as the singularity winked out of existence, leaving nothing but empty, silent space where the station had been. We have the proof, Lyriel panted, clutching the data drive like a lifeline. We have the weapon. Jax looked at her. She was battered, exhausted, and terrifyingly beautiful. Then let's go start a war, Jax said. The right kind. The galaxy was listening to a lie. It streamed across the subspace buoys, echoed through the trade lanes, and played on massive holographic screens in the heart of every colony world. The face of High Counselor Voth, solemn and heavy with manufactured grief, filled the void. It is with a heavy heart that I must declare the unimaginable. Vaith's voice intoned, smooth as polished obsidian. Princess Lyriel, heir apparent to the high throne, has been compromised. The human terrorist faction known as the Iron Dawn has not only kidnapped her but shattered her mind. They have twisted her with chemical agents and radical ideology. She is no longer the light of our people. She is a weapon aimed at our very hearts. Jax watched the feed from the cramped cockpit of the stolen pirate shuttle. His jaw was set so hard his teeth ached. "He is good," Jax muttered. "I will give him that. He almost sounds like he has a soul." Beside him, Lyriel stared at her own image on the screen, a manipulated video showing her looking disheveled and manic, shouting slogans she had never spoken. Her face in the reflection of the viewport was pale, the bioluminescence on her cheeks dim and gray. "He is erasing me," she whispered. "He is killing me without shedding a drop of blood. If I speak now, the people will hear only madness." "Then we have to speak louder," Jax said, pushing the throttle forward. "And we have to do it from the one place he thinks is safe." Ahead of them, the void parted. The Vithari capital, Ithra, was not a planet. It was a miracle of engineering and arrogance, a colossal ring world constructed entirely within the breathable atmosphere of a crystalline nebula. The structure floated in a sea of violet and gold gas, a band of silver metal and living light that circled a central artificial star. It was breathtaking. Towers carved from diamond glass pierced the clouds. Gravity-defying waterways arched between districts like ribbons of liquid mercury. Floating temples drifted on magnetic currents, their bells tolling sounds that could be felt in the marrow of the bone. "I used to think this was the center of the universe," Lyriel said, her voice hollow. "Now it looks like a gilded cage." "It is a fortress," Jax corrected, "and we are walking through the front door." They didn't dock at the glittering spires of the High District. Jax flew the shuttle down, deep into the murky, turbulent clouds beneath the ring, where the maintenance struts anchored the city to the void. They docked at a waste reclamation port, a place that smelled of sulfur and decayed ozone. The airlock hissed open, not to the fanfare of trumpets, but to the grinding roar of atmospheric recyclers. "Welcome home, Princess," Jax said grimly, checking the charge on his pistol. "Try not to touch anything, the grease down here stains." The lower levels of Ithra were a labyrinth of pipes, conduits, and shadow. This was the machinery that kept the paradise above functioning, manned by a caste of Vithari workers and human contractors who never saw the artificial sun. They moved through the steam-filled tunnels, hoods pulled low. Lyriel limped, the ache in her hip a constant, grinding reminder of her fall, but she did not complain. She moved with a grim determination that Jax had learned to admire more than her royal grace. They met their contact in a decommissioned thermal vent. Maynard was a Vithari scientist, twitchy and nervous, his skin flashing a frantic, staccato chartreuse. He wore the gray robes of the dot archivists, stained with ink and coolant. "You are alive," Maynard breathed, looking at Lyriel as if she were a ghost. "The news feeds. They said you were leading a death cult in the Outer Rim." "My uncle has a vivid imagination," Lyriel said dryly. "Maynard, do you have the access codes?" "I have them," Maynard stammered, wringing his long fingers. "But the security sweeps are intense. Vaith has doubled the Peacekeeper Guard. He is calling it the Unity Conclave. He plans to announce the activation of the defense grid tomorrow." "Ascension," Jax said. "He is calling it a defense grid." "He calls it safety," Maynard said. "The algorithm. I have seen the preliminary code. It is eating the archives. It is rewriting history in real time to align with Voth's narrative. If he turns it on fully, Truth becomes whatever the machine decides it is. We have the data from Kalis Prime, Lyriel said, holding up the data drive. The raw footage, the simulations of the genocide. If we plug this into the core prism during the broadcast, the network will not be able to filter it fast enough. Every screen in the Empire will show Vaith planning my murder. Maynard swallowed hard. The core prism is in the center of the celestial spire. It is the most guarded room in the galaxy. We know, Jax said. That is why we need uniforms, tech support. Nobody looks at the person fixing the toilet. I can get you inside the service elevator, Maynard said, trembling. But once you are on the spire level, you are on your own. If they catch you, they won't, Jax lied. He looked at Lyriel. We have a date with destiny. That night, the eve of the conclave, they found shelter in an old observatory dome on the edge of the industrial sector. It was a forgotten place, the glass clouded with age, but it offered a view of the nebula that swirled beneath the city. The gas clouds outside were a deep, bruising purple, shot through with veins of lightning. It was quiet here, the hum of the city distant and muffled. Lyriel sat on a crate, staring out at the storm. She had removed the heavy cloak, and in the dim light, her bioluminescence was soft, a steady, rhythmic pulse of blue that matched the nebula. Jack stood by the door, watching her. He felt that familiar ache in his chest, the one that had started on Kestrel Ring and had grown into something terrifying and massive. You should sleep, Jack said, walking over to her. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. I cannot sleep, Lyriel said without turning. I keep thinking about the speech Vaith will give. He will talk about duty. He will talk about sacrifice. He uses those words like knives. Jack sat down on the floor beside her crate, resting his arms on his knees. Words are just noise. Lyriel, it is what you do that counts. She looked down at him. Her face was shadowed, but her eyes were bright. I grew up thinking duty meant obeying the ones above me, she whispered. I thought power was gravity, pulling things to you, holding them in place, making them orbit your will. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and touched the side of Jax's face. Her fingers were cool, her skin smooth as silk. But you, she said softly, you showed me that duty means standing beside the ones beside you. It means catching them when they fall, even if it breaks your own bones. Jax leaned into her touch. He closed his eyes, savoring the connection. I did not break any bones catching you, just bruises. You know what I mean, she said, a small, sad smile touching her lips. Meeting you, it ruined me. Jax, I can never go back to being the girl on the throne who thought she was the center of the universe. You taught me what real power feels like. It is not commanding a fleet. It is choosing to protect someone simply because you love them. The word hung in the air. Love. It was the first time she had said it out loud. Jax opened his eyes. He looked up at her, and the raw honesty in her face broke him. You ruined me too, Jax said, his voice rough with emotion. I had a system, Lyriel. Survive, get paid, do not care. It was a good system. It kept me alive. He reached up and covered her hand with his own. Now I cannot even look at a star map without wondering if you are safe. I cannot pretend I do not care what happens to this damn galaxy. Because you are in it, you made me care. And that is a dangerous thing for a man like me. Lyriel slid off the crate, sinking to the floor so she was kneeling in front of him. The difference in their stations, the princess and the mercenary, vanished. There were just two people, terrified and desperate, huddled against the dark. I do not want to be safe, she whispered, leaning in until their foreheads touched. I want to be with you. The embrace that followed was not the frantic, adrenaline-fueled collision of the pirate ship. It was slow, deep, and aching. Jax wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He breathed in her scent, ozone and flowers and life. Lyriel clung to him, her hands bunching in his shirt. She felt fragile in his arms, her hips stiff, her body weary, but her spirit burned against him like a sun. They stayed like that for a long time, the nebula swirling outside, holding each other with the desperate intensity of soldiers on the eve of battle. They didn't need to undress to feel naked before each other. They had already stripped away every lie, every title, every defense. If we die tomorrow, Lyriel murmured against his ear. We are not going to die, Jax promised fiercely. But if we do, she insisted, know that I would rather die as a traitor by your side than live as an empress alone. Jax pulled back just enough to look her in the eye. Then let's make sure we live, he said, because I still owe you a new hip. The Unity Conclave began with a fanfare of trumpets that vibrated through the floor plates of the celestial spire. The central hall was a cavernous space of light and glass, suspended over the heart of the nebula. Thousands of dignitaries, Vithari nobles in shifting silks, human governors in stiff dress uniforms, filled the floating platforms. In the center, on a dais of pure white light, stood Lord Voth. He looked magnificent. His robes were woven from threads of gold and plasma, and his voice was amplified to reach every corner of the hall. Citizens of the Empire, Vaith boomed, we stand at a precipice. The galaxy is fracturing. Chaos knocks at our gates. High above the hall, in the maintenance catwalks, two figures in ill-fitting gray technician jumpsuits moved quickly. He loves the sound of his own voice, Jax grunted, adjusting the heavy tool belt that was chafing his waist. Focus, Lyriel whispered. She had pulled a cap low over her face, hiding her glowing patterns as best she could. The core prism is 3 junctions ahead. Maynar, are the sensors looped? Looping now, Maynar's voice crackled in their earpieces. He sounded like he was hyperventilating. You have a 10-second window between sweeps. Go. Go now. They sprinted. Jax led the way, checking the corners. Lyriel followed, her limp disguised by the heavy magnetic boots of the uniform. They reached the blast doors of the core prism. It was a hexagonal chamber pulsing with blinding white light, the physical intersection of the Empire's entire data network. Access panel, Jax said, pointing to a terminal. Lyriel knelt, wincing as her hip protested. She pulled a laser splicer from her belt. I am bypassing the biometric lock. Cover me. Covering, Jax said, drawing his pistol. He kept it hidden under a rag on his tool cart. My friends. Vaith's voice drifted up from the hall below. To ensure our survival, we must be one mind, one will. Today, I announce the activation of the Unity Defense Grid. No longer will we be divided by petty disagreements. We will be guided by the perfect logic of the ancestors. He is activating it, Lyriel hissed. I need more time. You do not have time, Jax said. I hear footsteps. A squad of peacekeepers turned the corner. They were elite guards, encased in white ceramic armor, carrying energy pikes. Hey, the lead guard shouted. That sector is restricted. Identify. Tech support, Jax called out, keeping his head down. Latrine malfunction, urgent. There are no latrines in the core, the guard said, raising his weapon. Hold position, Jax sighed. I tried the polite way. He moved. He threw the tool cart at the guards. It slammed into them with a clatter of metal. Jax drew his pistol and fired 3 stun rounds in rapid succession. 2 guards dropped. The third activated his energy shield. "Lyriel, get the door open," Jax shouted, diving behind a support pillar as plasma bolts scorched the air where his head had been. "I am trying," she screamed. "The encryption is evolving." "Use your interface." Lyriel ripped off her glove. She pressed her hand directly onto the data port. Her bioluminescence flared violently, surging through the panel. She forced her own neural pattern into the lock, overwhelming it with raw biodata. Click. The blast doors hissed open. "In!" Jax yelled. He fired a suppression shot and grabbed Lyriel, hauling her into the chamber. He slapped the manual override, sealing the door just as a heavy plasma blast slammed against it. They were inside. The core prism was a room of mirrors and light. In the center hung a massive spinning crystal, the brain of the Empire. "This is it," Lyriel said, limping toward the console. She plugged in the data drive. "Uploading the truth." "Access denied," the room announced. The voice was Voth's. The walls shimmered. A hologram of Voth appeared in the center of the room. It wasn't a recording. He was looking right at them. "Did you really think it would be that easy, niece?" Vath's hologram sneered. "He anticipated us." Jax realized, "It is a trap." "Redirecting security," the computer announced. "Gravity plates, hostile mode." The floor suddenly tilted 45 degrees. Jax and Lyriel slid, crashing into the wall. Then the gravity reversed. They fell toward the ceiling. "He is shaking us like dice in a cup," Jax shouted, grabbing a conduit to anchor himself. "He is trying to keep me away from the console," Lyriel yelled, hanging by one hand from a light fixture. The door blew open. Vath didn't walk in. He floated in on a grav platform, flanked by 4 combat drones. He had left the speech in the main hall, or a hologram of him had. The real Vath was here to finish it. "You look pathetic," Vath said, his voice echoing in the chaotic gravity. "Dressed in rags, dirty, crawling in the walls like vermin." He looked at Lyriel, who was struggling to pull herself upright on the tilted wall. Her face was twisted in pain, her hand clutching her hip. "Look at you," Vath laughed, a cruel, cold sound. "The jewel of the Empire. You have broken yourself on a human hip." The insult hung in the air, heavy with disgust. He wasn't just talking about the injury, then he was talking about her choice, her proximity to Jax. He made it sound like bestiality. "I did not break myself," Lyriel gasped, finding her footing as the gravity stabilized for a moment. "I woke up." Vath turned his gaze to Jax. "And you," Vath said, "the pet human. You have caused me a great deal of trouble. But I am a pragmatic man." The drones lowered their weapons slightly. "Walk away," Vath offered. "Leave her. I will give you a ship. I will give you a permit for a private colony in the Outer Rim. Enough credits to live like a king for 10 lifetimes. You are a mercenary, are you not? Take the payout." Jax looked at Vath. Then he looked at Lyriel. She was watching him, her eyes wide, her breath held. Jax laughed. It was a dry, bitter bark of a sound. "You think this is about money?" Jax asked. "You think you can buy me?" "Everyone has a price," Vath said. "My price is seeing you fall," Jax said. "I do not kneel to tyrants, and I definitely do not sell out the woman I love." Vath's face twisted in fury. "Then die with her! Drones! Fire! Now! Lyriel!" Jax screamed. He didn't shoot at the drones. He shot at the gravity generator on the wall. The unit exploded. The gravity in the room vanished completely. 0G. Jax kicked off the wall, moving with the practiced ease of a spacer. The drones, confused by the sudden loss of physics, faltered for a microsecond. That was all Jax needed. He tackled the nearest drone, using its own bulk as a shield as the others fired. Lyriel didn't fight the float. She used it. She pushed off the ceiling, spinning in the air. She didn't have to put weight on her hip in 0G. She was weightless. She was dancing. She flew past Vaith's platform, landing on the central console. "Stop her!" Vaith screamed. Pulling a ceremonial energy sword from his belt, Jax hurled the wrecked drone at Vaith. The High Counselor swatted it away, but the distraction bought Lyriel the second she needed. She slammed her hand onto the master interface. "Soreth!" she shouted. "Override protocol! Truth!" The crystal in the center of the room pulsed. It turned from white to a deep, angry crimson. "Broadcasting," the computer announced. "No!" Vaith roared. In the great hall below, Vaith's speech stuttered. The giant holographic screens flickered. Suddenly, the image of the benevolent leader was replaced. It showed the Kalis Prime refinery. It showed the simulations of genocide. It showed the video of Vaith ordering the sabotage of the Kestrel Ring. And then, it showed Lyriel. She stood at the console in the core prism, her hair floating in 0G, her technician's jumpsuit torn, her face smeared with grease. But her eyes were blazing. She spoke into the comms, and her voice was broadcast to every ship, every home, every screen in the Empire. "People of the Vithari," Lyriel said, her voice shaking but clear. "My name is Lyriel. I am not dead. I am not crazy. And I am not a traitor." She looked straight into the camera. "But he is." She pointed at Voth, who was floating helplessly in the background of the shot, his face a mask of panic. "He tried to kill me to start a war," Lyriel declared. "He wants to enslave your minds to a machine. He thinks you are sheep to be herded." She stood tall, wincing as she hooked a foot under a rail to anchor herself. "He told me I broke myself," she said, her voice gaining strength. "He told me I was weak for standing with a human. But I tell you this, strength is not silence. Unity is not a cage. And I would rather be broken and free than perfect and enslaved." Vaith screamed in incoherent rage. He leveled his energy sword at her. "Kill the feed!" Vaith shrieked at the drones. "Kill them all!" The drones' eyes turned red. They locked onto Lyriel's heart. Jax pushed off the wall, placing himself directly between the princess and the firing line. He had no shield. He had no plan. He just had his body and his promise. "Duty!" Jax whispered to himself. The lasers charged. "Stand down!" Lyriel commanded, her voice vibrating with the royal voice, a bioacoustic frequency that commanded obedience. The drones hesitated, but Vaith did not. He lunged, thrusting the sword toward Jax's chest. The broadcast continued, showing the galaxy exactly who the monster was. The confrontation teetered on the edge of disaster, suspended in the silent, weightless air of the core. The truth moves faster than light. In the core prism, time seemed to hang suspended in the zero-gravity vacuum. But outside, across the vast, terrified expanse of the Vithari Empire, the signal hit like a physical shockwave. Maynard had done it. The nervous scientist, huddled in a ventilation shaft 50 levels above, had bypassed the firewall. The broadcast did not stutter. It did not pixelate. It overrode every commercial feed, every military channel, and every holopad in the system. On the giant floating screens of the conclave hall, the image of Lord Voth, regal, composed, lying to his people, flickered and died. In its place, the raw, grainy footage from the Kalis Prime refinery roared to life. The galaxy saw the truth. They saw Vaith's face, not in the flattering light of the dais, but in the harsh blue glow of a tactical map. They heard his voice, stripped of its melodic rhetoric, cold and clinical. "The girl is a necessary sacrifice." The recording played, booming through the silent hall. "Her death will buy us absolute control. Frame the humans. Initiate the purge." In the celestial spire, the silence that followed was deafening. It was the silence of 1,000 years of blind faith shattering in a single heartbeat. Then, the screaming started. "Liar!" a Vithari noble shouted from the gallery, tearing the golden sigil of Vith's house from his robes. "Traitor!" screamed a human ambassador, pointing a shaking finger at the dais. On the floating platform, the real Voth stood frozen, his hand still extended in a gesture of benevolence that now looked grotesque. He stared up at the screens, watching his own treachery play out in high definition. The peacekeepers, the elite white-armored guards conditioned for absolute loyalty, faltered. Their heads turned from the screens to their commander. The cognitive dissonance was a physical blow. Some lowered their energy pikes, their faces slack with disbelief. Others, the hardliners whose loyalty was bought with zealotry rather than logic, doubled down. "It is a fabrication," a captain shouted, leveling his weapon at the dissenting nobles. "Protect the High Counselor! Fire!" The conclave hall dissolved into chaos. Blaster fire erupted, crisscrossing the beautiful crystalline air. In the core prism, the war was smaller, but the stakes were infinite. "Kill them!" Vaith shrieked, his composure cracking like cheap glass. "Burn them out of the sky!" The drones, confused by the conflicting data streams but hardwired to obey Voth's voice command, swiveled their red optical sensors toward Lyriel and Jax. "Move!" Jax roared. He kicked off the bulkhead, launching himself through the weightless air just as the drones opened fire. He didn't move away from the danger. He moved into it. He slammed into Lyriel, his momentum carrying them both behind the thick, humming column of the central data loom. A bolt of plasma scorched the air where they had been floating a microsecond before. Another clipped Jax's shoulder. He grunted, a sharp, wet sound. The smell of singed Kevlar and burnt flesh filled the small pocket of air. "Jax!" Lyriel gasped, grabbing his arm. Her hands came away slick with blood. "I am fine," Jax lied through gritted teeth. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, the shoulder a mess of charred uniform and raw pain. "Just a scratch. Keep working." Lyriel looked at the wound, then at the drones circling their cover. A cold, diamond-hard rage crystallized in her chest. They had hurt him? Again. She was done running. "Soreth!" Lyriel commanded, her voice vibrating with a power that had nothing to do with her title. "Interface with my neural net. Full synchronization." "Warning," the AI chirped from her wrist. "Biofeedback levels are critical. This will hurt." "Do it!" Lyriel didn't use a keyboard. She slammed her hand against the data loom's exposed circuitry. Her bioluminescence didn't just glow, it exploded. Patterns of blinding white light raced up her arm, burning through the fabric of her jumpsuit, jumping from her skin into the machine. She screamed as the electricity of the station surged through her nervous system. She wasn't just hacking the drones, she was becoming them. For a second, she saw the world through a dozen red optical sensors. She felt the cold logic of their targeting computers. Target Lyriel. Status, priority kill. "Rewrite," Lyriel snarled, her eyes rolling back, glowing with pure energy. "Target parameters. Update." The drones stopped mid-flight. Their engines whined as conflicting orders fought for dominance. Then, the red lights in their sensors blinked out and ignited a cool, loyal blue. Target. Hostile. The drones whipped around, facing Vaith. "What?" Vaith gasped, floating near the ceiling, his energy sword in hand. "No, I command you." "Your command is expired, Uncle," Lyriel said, pulling her hand from the loom. She slumped against Jax, smoke rising from her fingertips. Vaith looked at the drones, then at the screen showing his empire crumbling. He looked at the two of them, the broken princess and the bleeding human, and his face twisted into a mask of pure, nihilistic spite. "If I cannot rule this galaxy," Vaith hissed, "then no one will." He kicked off the ceiling, diving not toward them, but toward the manual override lever at the base of the core. The fail-safe, Jax realized, his eyes widening. He is going to scrub the network. He will crash the navigation buoys, the life support grids on the colonies. He will kill billions just to hide the evidence. "Stop him!" Lyriel cried, pushing herself off the column. But her hip seized, pain radiating up her spine. She faltered, spinning helplessly in the 0G. Vaith reached the console. His hand hovered over the black lever that would plunge the Empire into a dark age. "You are nothing," Vaith shouted at them. "You are glitches in the system, variables to be deleted." "We are not variables," Lyriel shouted back. Her voice was amplified by the open comms channel, booming through the prism and out into the chaos of the conclave hall. "That is why you lost, Vaith. You look at living beings and see math. You think power without empathy is stability, but it is rot. It is a cancer." Vaith hesitated for a fraction of a second, stung by the truth of her words. "Empathy is weakness." He grabbed the lever. Jax didn't speak. He didn't argue philosophy. He simply moved. Ignoring the screaming agony in his shoulder, Jax launched himself from the column. He flew across the chamber like a missile. Vaith saw him coming, but too late. Jax slammed into the High Counselor. The impact sent them both tumbling away from the console, spinning wildly toward the center of the room. They crashed onto the narrow maintenance walkway that bridged the open reactor shaft. The impact engaged the local gravity plating. They hit the metal hard. Jax groaned, his vision swimming. Vaith scrambled to his feet, his energy sword buzzing. "Filthy ape!" Vaith screamed, bringing the sword down. Jax rolled. The blade slashed the metal grating where his head had been, sending a shower of sparks raining down into the abyss. Jax kicked out, sweeping Vaith's legs. The High Counselor fell, dropping the sword. They grappled on the edge of the precipice. Below them, the raw energy of the core churned, a river of pure, unrefined starlight that powered the entire ring world. "I will build it again," Vaith spat, his hands closing around Jax's throat. "I will burn history and write it again in my image." Jax couldn't breathe. Black spots danced in his vision. He reached up, gripping Vaith's wrists, but the Vithari was stronger, fueled by madness. "You forgot," Jax choked out. "What?" Vaith sneered, squeezing harder. "What did I forget?" "Gravity," Jax rasped. Jax let go of Vaith's wrists and slammed his boot into the release catch of the walkway section they were standing on. The bolt sheared. The walkway tilted violently. Jax, anticipating the move, grabbed a hanging support cable with his good arm. Vaith grabbed nothing but air. The High Counselor's eyes went wide. For a moment, he hung suspended, clawing at the empty space, his face a portrait of absolute terror. "Lyriel!" he screamed. Then he fell. He tumbled down into the blinding white river of the core. There was no splash. Just a brief, intense flare of light as his body met the energy stream and was instantly atomized. The light in the chamber pulsed once, violently, then settled. Jax hung from the cable, swinging over the abyss. He looked down at the spot where Vaith had vanished. "Resignation accepted," Jax wheezed. With Vaith gone, the command signal holding the Ascension network together unraveled. It didn't end with a bang, but with a sigh. Across the Empire, the red warning lights on AI terminals blinked out. The aggressive, invasive algorithms that had been rewriting history simply stopped. The network rebooted. In the core prism, the red alert klaxons fell silent. The blue emergency lighting washed over the chamber. Jax pulled himself up the cable, groaning with effort, and collapsed onto the stable section of the platform. Lyriel floated down to him. She landed softly, ignoring the pain in her hip, and fell to her knees beside him. "Jax," she whispered, her hands hovering over his shoulder. "You are bleeding. You are bleeding so much." "I have had worse," Jax mumbled, his eyes fluttering shut. "Remember Proxima? That was worse." "Stay with me," she ordered, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "That is a royal command, human. Do not you dare close your eyes." "Just resting," Jax breathed. "Did we win?" Lyriel looked up. The screens on the wall were no longer showing Vaith. They were rebooting, showing the standard Vithari emblem, the circle of unity. But it was flickering, fragile. "We stopped the rot," she said softly, stroking his hair. "The rest is up to us." The blast doors hissed open. Maynard stood there, flanked by a squad of peacekeepers who had thrown down their weapons. "Highness!" Maynard cried, rushing forward with a medkit. "Help him," Lyriel said, her voice steel. "If he dies, Maynard, I will dismantle this station bolt by bolt." Idalum. The medical bay in the celestial spire was a far cry from the cargo hold on Kestrel Ring. It was a cathedral of healing, white and silent, smelling of lavender and sanitized air. Jax lay on a biobed, his shoulder encased in a regenerative gel pack. He was awake, groggy, watching the ceiling tiles shift color. "You are lucky," a voice said. Lyriel was sitting in a chair beside the bed. She had been cleaned up, her face scrubbed of grease, wearing a fresh robe of shimmering silk. But she looked exhausted. Her hip was propped up on a cushion. "The plasma cauterized the wound as it passed through," she said. "Another inch to the left, and it would have hit your heart." "I have a heart?" Jax cracked a weak smile. "I thought I was just a cynical mechanic." "You are a terrible mechanic," she said, leaning forward to take his hand. "You break everything you touch, including tyrants." Jax squeezed her fingers. "I think I am done, Princess. Between the shoulder, the ribs, and the sheer number of people trying to kill me, I am officially retiring. No more bodyguard work." Lyriel's expression softened. She raised his hand to her lips, pressing a kiss to his bruised knuckles. "Good," she whispered. "Because I am not hiring a bodyguard. I am exiling you." "Exiling me?" Jax raised an eyebrow. "To where? A prison asteroid?" "To my side," she said. "Forever. It is a life sentence. Jackson Rourke. Without parole." Jax looked at her, at the gold in her eyes and the light under her skin. "I accept the terms," he said softly. The power vacuum left by Vaith was massive, but it did not last long. The remaining council members, terrified of the public unrest, tried to do what they always did, find a figurehead. They came to Lyriel the next morning, offering her the crown. They wanted her to step onto the balcony, smile, and tell the galaxy that everything was back to normal. They expected the spoiled princess. They got the woman who had walked through fire. "I will not sit on the throne of silence," Lyriel told the trembling ministers in the war room. "There will be no more absolute rule. The Vithari are not the only sentients in this empire." "But Highness," a minister stammered, "tradition dictates." "Tradition nearly killed us all," Lyriel snapped. "We will have a dual council, equal seats for Vithari and humans, and independent oversight for all artificial intelligence." The room gasped. "Humans?" the minister choked. "In the High Council? It is unheard of." "Then start listening," Lyriel said. "Or I will release the rest of the logs from the Kalis refinery, the ones that show which of you signed off on the budget for the genocide." The room went deadly silent. "I thought so," Lyriel said. prepare the ceremony. The grand plaza of Ithra was packed. Millions of citizens, Vithari and humans, standing shoulder to shoulder for the first time in centuries, filled the square. Drone cameras hovered, broadcasting to 1,000,000,000,000 souls. The heavy golden doors of the palace balcony opened. Lyriel stepped out. She did not float. She did not wear the gravity assist boots that would have masked her injury. She walked on her own feet. Her gait was uneven. With every step on her right leg, she dipped slightly, a visible hitch in the perfect royal rhythm. It was a flaw, and she wore it like a crown. Behind her, one step back and to the right, stood Jax. He was not in a servant's livery. He wore a simple dress uniform, no medals, no rank insignia. He stood tall, his arm in a sling, watching the crowd not for threats, but with a quiet, steady pride. The crowd roared. It was a sound like the ocean, a mix of cheers, questions, and pure, raw hope. Lyriel raised her hand. The noise died down. She leaned into the microphone. She looked out at the sea of faces, faces that had been taught to fear each other. "We have a lot of work to do," she began, her voice clear and unpretentious. "We have to rebuild trust. We have to rebuild our laws. And we have to rebuild our hearts." She paused, glancing back at Jax. He winked at her. A smile broke across her face, not the practiced smile of a diplomat, but a real, mischievous grin. She turned back to the microphone, her eyes twinkling. "But first," she said, shifting her weight to her good leg and grimacing playfully. "I need a chair," the crowd murmured, confused. Lyriel looked over her shoulder at Jax, her voice dropping to a theatrical, mock-accusing tone that was perfectly audible to the entire galaxy. "I still can't sit comfortably, you know," she declared, pointing a finger at him. "You really did break my hip, human." For a second, there was silence. Then, a ripple of laughter started in the front rows. It spread, growing louder and louder until the entire plaza was shaking with it. It wasn't mocking laughter. It was relief. It was affection. The terrifying, distant princess had just made a joke about her own fragility. She had taken the symbol of her trauma, the injury that started it all, and turned it into a bridge. The broken hip would become a meme within the hour. By the next day, it would be a symbol of resilience. Jax stepped forward. He didn't bow. He didn't ask permission. He walked up to the microphone, standing right next to her. The laughter died down, replaced by a hushed anticipation. Jax leaned in, close enough that his breath stirred the hair at her temple. He didn't speak into the mic. He spoke only to her. But the cameras caught every nuance of his expression. "I will spend the rest of my life making up for it," Jax whispered. It wasn't an apology. It was a vow. It was a promise to be the gravity that held her when she couldn't stand, to be the shield and the partner. Lyriel looked at him, her eyes shining with tears. "You better," she whispered back. Then, in front of the High Council, the peacekeepers, and the watching galaxy, Jax leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a chaste, royal peck. It was deep, tender, and undeniably passionate. It was a human kissing a Vithari. It was the breaking of the ultimate taboo. And as they kissed, high above the plaza, the nebula flared with light, as if the universe itself was applauding. The months that followed were not easy. The montage of change was messy. There were protests in the streets. There were riots on the colony worlds where human governors refused to give up their new power, and Vithari nobles refused to share theirs. But there was also music. In the academies of Ithra, human children sat beside Vithari youth. They learned math and poetry, and in the hallways, they traded rhythms. A new sound began to emerge from the clubs in the lower districts. a fusion of Vithari harmonic chanting and the chaotic, improvisational syncopation of human jazz. It was dissonant, strange, and beautiful. Treaties were signed, not with ink, but with bioscans. Under the light of the nebula, mixed crews began to staff the trade ships. The fear didn't vanish overnight, but it began to recede, pushed back by the steady, grinding work of integration. 1 year later, the royal gardens of Ithra were quiet. The artificial sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the floating islands of moss and crystal. Jack sat on a stone bench overlooking the waterfall. He looked different. The lines of tension around his eyes had softened. He wore the robes of a counselor now, though he wore them with the sleeves rolled up, revealing his tattoos. Lyriel walked toward him along the path. Her limp was still there, a permanent hitch in her step, but she moved with a fluidity that incorporated the injury into her grace. She reached the bench and turned to sit. She winced, just for a fraction of a second, as she lowered herself onto the stone. She settled against Jax's side, resting her head on his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her automatically, his hand resting on her waist. "Rough day in the council?" Jax asked, kissing the top of her head. "The Trade Federation is arguing about tariffs on nutrient paste again." She sighed. "And the Terraforming Committee wants to paint the moon pink. I threatened to set the drones on them." "Please tell me you did not actually hack the drones again." "I thought about it," she admitted. "But then I remembered I am supposed to be a benevolent ruler." She looked out at the waterfall, the bioluminescent patterns on her skin pulsing a slow, contented violet. "It still hurts sometimes," she said softly, rubbing her hip. "When it rains, or when I sit too long." Jax tightened his grip on her. "I know." She turned her face up to his. Her eyes were clear, ancient, and young all at once. "It is a good hurt," she said. "It reminds me that I am real. Before you. I was perfect, and I was hollow." She smiled, a small, private thing. "Maybe my hip needed breaking," she joked, "so my heart could be rebuilt too." Jax laughed, the sound warm and low in the quiet garden. "That is a terrible medical theory. Princess, Doc Holloway would lose his license." "I am the Empress," she said imperiously. "I make the theories." "Yes, Your Highness," Jax said, leaning in to kiss her nose. They sat there as the stars came out, a former mercenary and a limping queen watching the galaxy turn. They didn't have a happily ever after, and they had work to do. They had arguments to win, worlds to fix, and 1,000,000 miles to go. But they had each other. And in a universe vast and cold and full of silence, that was the only victory that mattered.